guys are still with us, huh? Late in the day, but hearing lots of people talk. Well, it's truly a pleasure to be here. This is my first Medicine X, although I feel in many respects it's kind of like a homecoming. When I got here yesterday, I got in really late the night before, so I came a couple hours later. It took me about an hour and a half to actually get into the front door because I kept bumping into people that I hadn't seen or that I wanted to see. So thanks so much. So today I'm going to talk to you about a movement that's beginning. And basically I want to tell you a story. It's partly personal, it's partly bigger than me, but I want you to listen very closely because at the end of this, I have an assignment. And my hunch is that the people in this room are going to be really interested in taking on this assignment and doing really well. So bear with me. What do you think of when you hear the term hacker? Anyone? Anonymous? Edward Snowden? Pardon? Problem solver? This is definitely a different crowd than the ones I get in Washington.
Yeah, I was going to say that Russians trying to mess with their election.
That's right. That's right. They don't get out much, right? Perhaps Russian teenagers. So there are a lot of different definitions of the word hacker and the term hacker. These are some of the ones that I like that I think are really reflective of the movement that we're going to be talking about. It's somebody who takes different pieces of electronic equipment, puts it together in new and novel ways. Somebody who finds security holes or problems, is able to infiltrate a particular computer system or network. Somebody who thinks cleverly or precociously, doesn't put up with the status quo and where things are. But also somebody who clears a path, who goes ahead in the forest or the brush, or pick your wildlife outside metaphor you want to choose, and makes it easier for other people to follow in their footsteps, to follow their lead. And especially for this crowd and in the patient world, is somebody who could cope, who can deal, who is confronted with difficulty, whatever that difficulty may be, and is able to stick with it. Well, everybody that is part of the movement today, of the patient hacker movement, each of these things really represents a certain aspect of this particular movement, and the type of people who are really changing the way that healthcare is working and is going to work in the future. So how does somebody like me become a patient hacker? Well, I have to say that, first of all, I'm not a real hacker. I've written a little bit of code here and there, but nobody really wants me to write some code. But I've always considered myself to be sort of a spiritual hacker, not really putting up with the status quo. But a few years ago, I took my BA in journalism and my background in public affairs because I was frustrated with the rate of stagnation in the research community, particularly around diabetes and outcomes measures. I created a company that does big data analytics. This is how I got there. What a lot of people don't realize is that type 1 diabetes, which is the disease that I have, can very easily be fatal. In fact, 1 in 20 people who have type 1 diabetes, who take insulin, die, usually in their sleep, of an insulin overdose. And you may be doing the exact same thing every day, following the doctor's orders perfectly, even beyond perfectly, and the way that your body uses insulin changes. So over the past 31 years, I've developed all the complications from diabetes. I have eye disease, nerve disease, kidney disease. I take 15 different medications to manage my diabetes and the complications and the comorbid conditions. I use a ton of different digital devices. I have a continuous glucose monitor that I wear 24/7. I have an insulin pump that I wear 24/7. I have a blood glucose meter to manage my kidney disease. I use a wireless Bluetooth blood pressure cuff. I use a digital scale, which tells me really critical pieces of information about hydration, which is a really good sort of surrogate on-the-fly marker of how your kidneys are doing. I also use Fitbit trackers, heart rate monitors, etc. All of this stuff is incredibly important to me as I try to figure out what are the patterns that matter. On top of that, there's this constant need to do algorithms in the back of your mind. And a lot of people don't really realize this, and sometimes I play this mind experiment with friends who have type 1. It's like, what on earth would we do with all of our brain space if we weren't constantly calculating? I don't know, it's kind of frightening. But there's this constant need to do these algorithms. Where am I now? Where is my blood sugar? Where was I last 2 hours ago? What did I eat for breakfast? Did I eat breakfast? Did I eat lunch? Did I work out yesterday? If so, what kind of workout was it? Was it strength training? Was it cardio? Was it yoga? Because each of those three things has a completely different, independent, and variable impact on your blood sugar level. Do I have a meeting that's coming up? If so, is that meeting going to be stressful? Am I going to walk to that meeting, or am I going to take a cab? Did I get good sleep last night? Because if I didn't, there's probably a lot of cortisol in my bloodstream, and that has a different impact on your blood sugar. All of this stuff is critical. All of it is constantly going through the back of your head, whether you have type 1 diabetes or you're a parent of somebody with type 1 diabetes, there's the constant need for math. And I was a journalism major. So I took logic and philosophy to get away from math. But this is the life that we have to live. It's constant, it's frustrating. But despite the fact that we have all of these data, all of these digital tools and methods that have really important, specific, understood, well understood healthcare information embedded in them, and it's all structured, machine readable, despite that, when people look at whether it's FDA, whether it's health insurers, other with CMS, private payers, when they consider what is important, is a new diabetes drug or device safe and effective, they look at one measure, hemoglobin A1C, which is a biomarker. It's taken through a blood test. Basically, it's an average. You have your blood sugar level over 2 to 3 months. And if you're somebody like me who has a lot of variability, which is a lot of people with type 1 diabetes, it's a little bit like using a farmer's almanac to plan your afternoon. You kind of get a sense of what the temperature might be, but nobody's going to use that when you've got the app, the weather app on your phone, or Weather Underground, or name your favorite tool. But this is what we're using to evaluate diabetes drugs. This is why I took my BA in journalism and my background in public affairs. And about 6 years ago, I co-founded a company called Galileo Analytics. And the whole goal for our company is to make it possible to kind of democratize the process of data access, make it easy for anybody, regardless of their ability to write computer code, to be able to explore visually through an interface that's easy to use and dynamic. Then something funny happened. About, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, I was having a particularly difficult time with my diabetes, and I needed to go see my doctor, and I started trying to pull in the data from my continuous glucose monitor, from my pump, all of this stuff. All I wanted was a single timeline. And what I realized is that, after about 6 months as a health IT entrepreneur, I could use the term data architecture in a sentence. Wasn't that much more sophisticated than that, but I knew enough to know that the fact that after 6 hours of trying to get access to my data and put it all in one place and to create a timeline so that I and my doctor could go through what on earth was happening, I knew enough to know that the fact that I had that problem was not a technological problem. It was an issue of urgency and will. From a technological perspective, this issue could have been fixed 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It's machine-readable, structured data that we know, that we understand, that we have a lot of body of evidence to suggest what exactly that data means. All I wanted to do, all I needed to do, was to be able to pull it into one single timeline so that I could see the patterns and go through that with my doctor. This is still impossible. 5 years later, it's still impossible for me to get access to all of this. And the issue was not one of technology not being ready or ready. It was one of will, a lack of a sense of urgency on the part of policymakers and others. So I thought about this for a while, and I realized maybe I should start a company that does this, because a lot of different people are going to have the same issue. This is an up-and-coming thing. What I realized is it wasn't an issue of technology. It was one of policy, of public policy with the FDA, and of private policy with companies. People who chose to keep the data isolated in non-standard formats, in silos that maybe someday they thought might be valuable. If nobody else had it and they're the only ones that had it, they wanted to be able to retain that right. So as somebody who's a multi-layered nerd who lives in DuPont Circle in downtown Washington and had a background in public affairs, I said, this can't stand. So I started doing a lot of advocacy with FDA, with the Office of National Coordinator in Health IT, being on boards, panels, speaking at various meetings like this. And over time, we started to see a little bit of change. And then as I started doing more and more speaking, I was connected to a broader community, primarily through the DiabetesMine Innovation Summit, which is started by my friend Amy Tenderich, who was supposed to be speaking right now, but couldn't. And the really cool thing is that through the DiabetesMine Innovation Summit, we all started kind of finding each other. And you saw Dana Lewis yesterday, you saw Ben West yesterday. We're all part of this broader community that connects online, but importantly, especially for a group like Medicine X, it wasn't just the online and the Twitter sphere that did it, it was the cementing of the in-person relationship in addition to the ability to connect outside of the in-person meeting and relationship that pulled all of this together. And a few years ago, or actually about 2 years ago, Amy and I and our friend Howard Look and a couple of other people started organizing all of this stuff around the hashtag We Are Not Waiting. And we started the hashtag, but this was truly a movement that had started and was growing and is continuing to grow. And there's been some incredibly cool things that we've seen happen. And again, I want to emphasize, I'm not a real hacker. There are some really, really talented people out there like Dana and Ben who are doing incredibly important stuff. So the movement started growing. We have app developers. Most of them are, the ones that I'm showing you are all driven by patients. Doug Cantor is here. He has diabetes. Tidepole, I don't know of anybody from Tidepole here, but they're located locally. But basically, it's all patients and parents of patients who said, you know what, we're going to do an app. It's going to work better than whatever it is that's out there. This is critical. And then secondly, one of the super cool things that started happening is a group of people figured out, I'm not holding it right now, but there's this little receiver for continuous glucose monitor. The newer version had a little mini USB port in it. And these guys figured out that if they could get through that little mini USB and get access to that data stream, which was a lot of significant engineering and stuff that Ben West, who spoke yesterday, did a lot of, that if they could do that, they'd be able to connect it to an Android phone. And for the first time, parents were able to monitor their children while their children were at school and to see what was happening. And as somebody who's lived with type 1 for 30 years, I can't possibly imagine how frightening it must be to have a child with type 1. I can't imagine. I'm a crazy dog lady. If my dogs had type 1, I would be a basket case. So the fact that these people were able to monitor their children as they went off to school, as they went to soccer practice, as they were able to go to sleepovers for the first time, because a lot of parents don't want diabetic kids to come over because they're afraid. They don't want to be liable. So these people were able to let their children be children. They started Night Scout, which is this process. It's a community that's grown. It's all open source. They put their code on GitHub, and everybody iterates their way through it. And it's this amazing process. They started something called CGM in the Cloud, which is a Facebook group, which 2 weeks ago hit 20,000 people that are members of that one Facebook group, and you have to sort of like apply or ask to be admitted. It's now, the CGM in the Cloud Night Scout group covers like 27 different countries. This is something that started 2 years ago. There are 27 different countries who have different versions of this, all in their own language. And it truly has become a gathering place for the diabetes community. And people are saying, we are not waiting. You know, we're ahead of the game in many respects in the US. There are lots of other countries who aren't nearly as far along as we are. This is a community created by patients, for patients, the idea that we're not waiting. But it didn't stop there. As you saw yesterday, many of the same people from Night Scout, like Dana and Ben and a few others, have closed the loop. We've been talking about doing an artificial pancreas for quite some time. There are a variety of people who are going through the regulatory process and doing it the long, slow way. In the meantime, we still have people dying, people, you know, at significant risk. Dana and Ben created a We Are Not Waiting Night Scout version of basically an open source artificial pancreas system where you took a pump and you took a CGM and you connected the two and you let the CGM dose the pump. Just using traditional, like super, basically you can buy it on Amazon. They started with a Raspberry Pi, now they're using smaller versions of Edison. But it's really fantastic. The numbers that they're getting, and I don't have one. The way they've done it is incredibly responsible. You have to know how to code to be able to do it, because if it breaks, you need to be able to fix it. So I don't have one. I haven't coerced anybody that I know who lives near me to be able to build one for me. But the numbers that these guys get, when I see it on Twitter, it just, I can't imagine what that must feel like to wake up every day with normal blood glucose. I mean, it's just, I haven't done it for so long. I don't even know what that would, I can't imagine what that would be. There are a couple of other folks that are doing it sort of the more traditional way. Many of the people from the We Are Not Waiting movement are part of Bigfoot Pharmaceuticals, or biomedical, I guess is what they're called. And they're taking the algorithm, the closed loop process through the regulatory structures. They're now enrolling in clinical trials. This is super cool stuff. But a lot of people say diabetes patients are different. It's a super data intensive disease. You get it when you're young. You guys are different. You're outliers. The reality is that is not the case. I mean, everybody here knows who Hugo Campos, he's been talking about these issues for a while, figured out his own way to do it. This movement, this spirit, is permeating other fields all around the globe, all over the country. We've got people who are developing iPhone-based sensors for ostomy bags. Fortunately, I don't have an ostomy bag. How cool is that? And he's now, this guy's from the UK, and he's now got some sort of a relationship with a medical device manufacturer who's taking it and trying to commercialize the same thing. One of my favorites is the 3D printing of prosthetic arms, which is something that's available. It's all open source through this platform. They share the code. They share the AutoCAD drawings or whatever. So now there are kids in developing countries who are very low resourced who are able to basically 3D print prosthetic arms. Super, super cool stuff. All of it done completely outside of the traditional biomedical device regulatory world. All done by patients, people who live with patients and caregivers, creating the solutions they need because they're tired of waiting for other people to do it. And the cool thing about technology is that this is growing. This is something that's now possible. It wasn't 10 years ago. Today it is, and that trend is only going to continue. All right, so that's devices. You know, the maker movement exists. People are hacking, putting stuff together in the garage, whatever. It's not stopping there. This is a quote from my good friend Matt Might, who was supposed to be here, but I'll yell him afterwards. Matt has a son with a very rare genetic disease, and basically he's taking the same spirit to drug development, where you can now, through technology, essentially outsource all of the different bits and pieces of drug development. So think about this. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, you had to have enormous amounts of capital to be able to figure out what the genetic variation was, the mutation. Now you can outsource a lot of that. You can do it virtually. You can do cloud-based high-throughput screening to determine what kind of a molecule would actually hit that particular genetic target. And now you can also outsource molecular chemistry. So once you've identified potential molecular targets, there are people now who can create compound and chemical structures that would hit that specific pathway. There are some people who say within 15 years we're going to be able to 3D print proteins in our own home or in a community lab. The process has changed. All of the elements of drug development have become disintermediated. The hacker movement is growing. It has the potential to grow more, and it will continue to grow more. One of the things that I'm working on is with the Scripps Translational Science Institute called Vital Crowd. And essentially what this is designed to do is it's crowdsourcing, but it's designed to take the hacker movement into the design of clinical research and trials and all sorts of health research, bringing the expertise of those who live with disease or care for people with disease or care for people in the community into the process of designing all aspects of research, from what matters to what should the protocol look like to what tools should we use to be able to collect that data. The idea isn't just about, how does your diabetes make you feel, or do you like red or blue for the website, but, what's the best data to collect? There are people out there who are computer programmers or aeronautical engineers who play incredibly important roles in the diabetes world. I want those people to weigh in on how we should do trials. What matters and what's the best method. I did a trial a few years ago. I'm screened out of most of them because I'm so complex and an outlier. And everything about that process for the trial was designed for everybody but the person like me who was participating. It was set up for researchers, set up for the pharmaceutical company, with complete disregard for the patient and the participant. As a result, they had a 70% dropout rate, and that drug never went through completion. Now think about all the people, the Venn diagrams we're drawing. People who have type 1 diabetes, who use pumps, who are interested in and live near a place to do clinical research. For a marginal incremental benefit, all of us, they put all of our goodwill through this process that was really poorly designed, and people got put off the research process. We have to fix this. We have to fix it. The cool thing is that it's fixable. So, your assignment. If you're in this room, you play a part of this movement. There's a good chance if you're in this room that you're playing a really cool, fun part. But you need to think about what exactly you want that to be. Are you going to be the person who stands in the way? Are you going to help us advocate for regulatory change, for a change in corporate policy, to make data more free, more available? I want you to think about what is my role in this process. This is my email, my Twitter handle, a couple of other websites. I would love to hear specifically from you, what is your role in this process? You can tweet it, tag it, email me, whatever. But I want to begin collecting all of these stories and be able to share those and to paint the portrait of the maker movement, of the patient hacker community in a way that gives me the ability to talk to different audiences, different places, particularly in DC, where they love to say that people like me are the exception, and say these are the people who are creating healthcare that they need. They're not waiting for you. They're not waiting for companies. We now have the ability through technology and through connections to do what we need to do for our own health.